What's up, YouTube? So before we get started with this video on Get Up, they're going to be talking about can the San Francisco 49ers defense shut down Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. So let's see what they have to say.
Can this 49ers defense at least slow him down, and how?
I believe they can, and it's because of their ability to force pressure up front with just four guys. I'm a big proponent of that. I know a lot of people are talking about, well, are you watching Patrick Mahomes? Yes, but in a defensive meeting room, in a week leading up to when you're playing a dynamic player, if you can get four guys around the quarterback, that affects them. I don't care who it is. The greatest ones that ever play this game, under pressure, uncomfortable, they're not the same guy. And
Yup, pressure bust a pipe.
this too, San Francisco is the #1 blitz team as far as creating pressure and getting sacks in the NFL. This is the plan. Like we are going to break this game down 100 ways before we get to the Super Bowl. Yeah. The absolute plan is you four guys earn these positions in where we drafted you, and go figure out how to get around this guy and affect him in a positive way to help our guys on the back end.
But
So the 49ers defense are more than capable of shutting down or neutralizing Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. Those guys are just a bunch of wild savages that are just, they're a bunch of headhunters. So let's take a look at their past two games. So against Green Bay, they absolutely shut down the run with Aaron Jones. So he had 12 rushes for 56 yards and 1 touchdown, which forced Aaron Rodgers to throw the ball. So Aaron Rodgers went 31 for 39, 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and 3 fumbles. So, the 49ers forced Aaron Rodgers to throw when they shut down the run. And against the Vikings 2 weeks ago, so the 49ers defense, they got 6 sacks, caused 4 fumbles, and Richard Sherman got a pick in the third quarter that kind of changed the tail of the game. So, these guys are firing on all, like I said, these guys are a bunch of wild savages that are just some headhunters. And it all starts up front with Nick Bosa, Sheldon Day, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead. So Nick Bosa is a Pro Bowler. Richard Sherman's a Pro Bowler. So, those guys are a bunch of wild savages that are just ready to get after it, that are firing on all cylinders. So, let's continue.
But the San Francisco 49ers are going to have to change the way they do things and self-scout. 4 just isn't enough. They got to mix it up because they play zone 64% of the time. If you do that against Mahomes and gives him the time in those passing lanes, Dan, you understand when you have 4 guys, you still have 2 open lanes that you can throw through or run through. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to come with some line stunts, distort his vision, make him buy time and get outside of the pocket and try and set some traps. And you're going to have to do something that's uncharacteristic for you. You're going to have to make sure that you try and light him up and blitz him and sometimes bring 5. And I know what you're saying. He's a smart enough quarterback that can find the hot route, and he's hard to confuse, but you can't allow him to run around and get outside that pocket. You got to set edges.
Well, here's the way
So the defense is definitely going to have to contain Patrick Mahomes, which starts up front, like I said. But let's take a look at some of the stats last week against the Green Bay Packers. So Williams had 7 tackles for 1 sack. Nick Bosa had 2 tackles for 1 sack. Eric Armstead had 3 tackles, 1 sack. DeForest Buckner had 4 tackles and a fumble recovery. Richard Sherman had 2 tackles and a pick. Emmanuel Mosley had 4 tackles and 1 pick. So, all those guys are firing on all cylinders. And like I said, it starts with Nick Bosa, Sheldon Day, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead. They're definitely going to have to, run some games up there on the line and mix things up. And, Fred Warner and Mr. Alexander, they're definitely going to have to be blitzing on and off to really confuse and throw off Patrick Mahomes. But once he's scrambling around and has somebody a target that he thinks has a target, Richard Sherman, Jimmy Ward, Emmanuel Mosley, and Mr. Tart are going to be there to take care of business. Richard Sherman's had a pick in the past 2 games. So this defense is a bunch of wild savages that can definitely get after it. So let's continue.
To ask the question to you, Dan Orlovsky, as you break down quarterback play, I know you've been sitting there and just studying film of Patrick Mahomes nonstop. Dominique Foxworth said an interesting thing on the show last week. The kid's been in the league 2 seasons plus. He's never had a bad game. He hasn't played a bad game. So what constitutes containing him? What constitutes putting up a good enough defensive effort against him and them that your team has a chance to win?
It's 4 plays. It's those 4 plays that he has a game where he eludes pressure or moves in the pocket, and then those 4 plays equal 100+ yards. It's the chunk that he gets off of, and it's not necessarily like when you get him in the back of the pocket and it's going to be a 5 or 6 yard loss. Patrick Mahomes doesn't turn it into a 1 or 2 yard gain. He turns it into a 30 or 40 yard gain, and that's what San Francisco needs to be really wary of. That would, to me, that would be like the bad game for Patrick Mahomes if he doesn't have those 4 kind of back-breaking, game-changing plays, where as a defense, you sit there and go, man, we just called the perfect play, and our guys executed it perfectly, and we got there, but we didn't. And Mahomes turned it into this massive 40-yard game. That will be the one thing that will determine, or will go a long way in determining if San Francisco does a great job defensively or not. The interesting thing for me with this game, when it comes, this is his greatest challenge. This, in his short 2-year career, is the greatest challenge. This is more difficult than the New England game last year because, to Marcus's point, the front 4. I need people to understand, like, when you can rush a quarterback with front 4, the biggest thing is that forces me to get the ball out of my hands sooner than I want to. And while you're doing that and I have to get the ball out, I have 7 sets of eyes on me, 7 sets of eyes on the ball. And so the ball is going to be in harm's way more often than not. That's why it's his greatest challenge to perform.
If you look at
So I completely agree. Like I said before, those guys up front are a bunch of savages led by Nick Bosa. So Nick Bosa, Sheldon Day, DeForest Buckner, and Eric Armstead, those guys are more than capable of getting up and putting pressure on Patrick Mahomes. And like Dan said, that's definitely going to make him throw the ball sooner than he wants to and possibly make some bad decisions. But you got the DBs back there led by Richard Sherman, who's a Pro Bowler. They can definitely take care of business back there and locking up receivers. And if he makes a bad enough mistake, they can pick that ball and take it to the house. So these 49ers, I mean, these guys, like I said, they're a bunch of savages from top to bottom. And it starts with those guys up front. And it's just, like I said, I think defense wins championships. I think the San Francisco 49ers defense is better than the Kansas City Chiefs offense, even though they have one of the best tight ends in the league, Travis Kelce, one of the best wide receivers, Tyreek Hill. I think the 49ers will be able to neutralize the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes and win the championship. So let's continue.
every one of those plays, there were no edges set. Right, so if you're a pass rush, you have to be disciplined in your pass rush. You have to be able to retrace. So if you get too far up the field, you got to retrace.
3-man rush, okay? Don't do that, and they're not. But to get, I go back to the Denver Broncos playing against
DeMarcus and.
That's the game plan. That's the game plan San Fran needs to go in with. Now, it doesn't matter that that Peyton wasn't. Cam was trying to operate from the pocket. Cam was the threat to run the football.
Right.
And that's what you have to be concerned with about Pat Mahomes, the extension of plays. If he beats you just standing in the pocket comfortable, you didn't do a good enough job rushing, but you can't allow him, to Dan's point, to make those dynamic plays.
That's the example.
So I think the 49ers, like I said, I think they're good enough and they're fast enough and precise enough that they will be able to shut down Patrick Mahomes' big plays. Actually, I don't think they'll let it get to the point where he's able to make big plays because, like I said, that front four, those guys are going to be on him. And those DBs back there are going to just be some headhunters waiting for him to make a mistake and pick the rock off. Like I said, Richard Sherman has had 2 games back-to-back where he's had interceptions. So, I mean, those guys are stout. Those guys are raw. And, you know, they're definitely going to have to keep contained. And I think they can do it. I think defense is definitely going to win the championship for the 49ers this year. Even though, like, the Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill, all those guys are ballers. But I think the defense is just going to be a little bit too much for them. So let's continue.
That we're talking about. It was Cam Newton as the MVP of the league with a 15-1 Carolina team that ran into a defense led by Von Miller and those guys in Denver, and they dominated the game. Can this San Francisco